Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. What happens when everything you've built, status, career, purpose, starts to crumble? Not because you failed, but because your body, your mind, your wiring simply says, no more. My guest today is Dr. Jeanne Retief. For over a decade, she worked on the front lines of international human rights law, fighting for justice in some of the world's most complex systems. Then came the crash, a diagnosis of panic disorder, the kind of invisible collapse that so many high performers silently live through, but rarely speak about. But Jeanne didn't just rebuild, she reimagined everything. From the ashes of that moment, she created Figgi Beauty, a skincare line born not from marketing trends, but from lived experience. And the Anxious Calm, a platform and community for those who spent too long pretending they're okay. Today, she's not just running a business, she's building a movement for sensitive souls, high achievers, and anyone trying to lead while still learning how to breathe. This episode isn't about skincare. It's about how we reclaim the power from pain and how sensitivity, far from being a weakness, might just be your superpower. Jeanne Retief, welcome to Extrology. It's a real privilege to have you here. Welcome to the UK.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for your great pronunciation of my surname. People don't usually get that right. So
It's a good start. It's a good start.
Good start.
And I want to start, if I may, I want to start in the now, because you're not, I'd alluded to it, you're not usually based in the UK. You live in Lisbon.
Yeah.
But you're here in person, clearly, which is wonderful. What brings you to the UK right now? And what does this moment represent for you?
So I came to the UK because I just launched Figgi Beauty in the UK. It's been going for 2.5 years in the States. And we opened our flagship store in Scotland last week. I've always wanted to open a store here. So I'm so happy that it happened now. I feel it's the right time. Before it wasn't. I just have this wonderful, wonderful person on my side. She's the head of the UK, Emma. She lives in Scotland. And everything just aligned. It was Easter holidays. I could bring my little girl. It was a great time to launch the store. We have new products coming out. So that's the reason why I'm here.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the launch. And we're going to get into the story of Figgi for sure. But before we go back into that story, who are you today in your own words?
Probably an anxious overachiever like many other people. I mean, it's so easy to say all the superficial things like I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an entrepreneur, but I think I'm just at this moment in my life a very content seeker. And I'm okay with that because I'm finding my way, I'm finding my path, I'm recognizing what is for me and what is not for me. And that's helping me kind of shape my career and what I want this business to look like, what I want my life to look like. And how I deal with my panic disorder diagnosis, it's just all kind of coming together. So I'm pretty content in this seeking space I'm in. Fantastic.
Well, I want to go back then into the story, if you like, the origin and breaking down that origin. You had a thriving career in international human rights.
Mm-hmm.
What part of that journey did you most attach your identity to, do you think?
Service, 100% for sure. I remember when I was at law school, when we were graduating and you are applying to go do your articles of clerkship, there was this kind of mass panic between the students because now you really want to get a job. You want to be sure you're at big 5 law firms. What's your salary going to be like? What kind of law are you going to practice? And I just absolutely had no interest in that. I always knew I wanted to go to legal aid. So my biggest fear was understanding if there would be budget in legal aid to afford another candidate attorney. I always knew I wanted to be in service and helping the poor and marginalized and hopefully one day being part of the UN. So that's really what drove me into that. And I think it comes from my background and my history to this need to want to change things and to help those that can't speak for themselves. That was greatly what I attached my identity to.
And where did that stem from?
So I grew up in quite a difficult upbringing. My parents were divorced when I was maybe a year old. They both had their own issues. My dad battled a lot of his own anger demons and alcohol demons, and him and my mom hate each other until this day. In my mom's side, we lived with my grandparents, and it was the age-old story of my mom was trying to work, my dad was trying to work, they were trying to provide for us, my stepdad. So she had no other choice but to leave us with our grandparents so they could take us to school, could take us to our extramural activities. He saw an opportunity, and my sister and I were both sexually abused by him for a number of years, and we were with him alone every single day. My family came from a very, very settled history of generational trauma. So it was very difficult to compute that, because the message was almost like, what's happened to you is bad, but not as bad as what's happened to us. So, the things I commonly heard is the world owes you nothing. You need to be stronger. Don't cry so much. Don't be so sensitive. So I learned from a very early age to walk on eggshells, to make sure that I'm always keeping myself safe, to stay out of the way, to make sure nobody around me gets angry, because there was a lot of bizarre behavior in my household. And I think the only way I could understand what to do with that was to sort of get myself in a position of power where I could do something about that. And working with others that had gone through the same as I had gone through, by either helping with maintenance issues in divorce cases or child abuse issues, kind of gave me that energy I needed to be in that career.
I wanted to ask, my next question was going to be, when did you first notice something was off? And I didn't mean just in terms of stress, but perhaps something deeper. But from what you've just alluded to, clearly there's a very much deeper story here that leads ultimately into the panic disorder to which we refer, that goes way deeper than my observations around, as I say, not just stress, but something deeper.
Yeah. So I think I grew up always feeling like I was wrong in some way or broken in some way, because my first memory is of having a panic attack. My first memory is of being 5 or 6 years old. Now that I understand what a panic attack is, I can say, oh, that was happening to me that day. But I was always this unbelievably anxious child. And I think it's because of this, I was always trying to navigate how I should protect myself, how I should protect those around me. And when I went to university in my second year, it caught up to me in some way. And I didn't know what to do with that. That was very traumatic for me. I didn't know how to voice it. I didn't know to explain what was happening to me. So I just had this deep hurt inside of me, this need to be clean, to be absolved of whatever shadow I felt was following me. And for me, that looked like trying to take my own life. And unfortunately, I did try. Fortunately, it did not work. But, the response to that was putting me in a psychiatric hospital for 3 weeks against my will. And that just led to an avalanche of really bad decisions and horrible mistakes, because I just went into this complete rebellious phase when I was finally allowed out. And, I just completely ignored it for over a decade. I didn't want to go back to that. I didn't want to speak to doctors. I didn't want to go to psychologists, because I didn't want this to happen to me again. And then one night when I was traveling for my human rights career, it caught up with me, and I had my biggest panic attack yet. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was having a stroke. I wasn't in a good area because I was working for my human rights work. I couldn't find a hospital. It was an absolutely brutal experience.
Do you mind me asking as to how that manifests? How did that feel? Because we hear lots of, and rightly and thankfully so, there's a lot of conversation around anxiety or issues around depression, all these sorts of things. I think truly understanding what something like this might be,
Yeah.
above and beyond, sometimes this is an accusation I would level at you, but I think sometimes people's initial reaction or reactions to lots of things is, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, this is a panic attack, whatever it may be. Actually, some of this is just life. For some people, that life is shitty sometimes and hard, and it will bite you, and it will, it's never a straight line, lots of ups and downs. But for you, this is clearly rooted in some horrible abuse and all sorts of things associated with that. How does that manifest physically? This panic, to the extent to which you think, to your point, you feel you're having a stroke.
Yeah.
That must be, that strikes me as awful. How did that feel for you?
So first of all, I'm really, really glad you brought that up, because a lot of people get very angry at me. And I want to be very, very clear that I am not taking away from anybody's experience in this.
No, clearly.
But I was
Absolutely.
diagnosed with panic disorder before it was cool, before everybody had anxiety, right? So, and I have a lot of issues with social media and the use of the word anxiety when you didn't get the milk you wanted for your latte. Anxiety and an anxiety disorder is a diagnosable mental illness. You have to see a psychiatrist. You have to see a psychologist that works in anxiety disorders. There are many different types of anxiety disorders, so that you know if you have an anxiety disorder or if you're just going through a period of intense chronic stress in your life and you just need a little bit of assistance. There's a difference between that. So for me, in terms of a panic attack like I experienced that night, if you have panic disorder, yes, it is because you have panic attacks. But it's much, much, much more than that. It encompasses a lot more. The experience from that night, it's so difficult to explain, because even now when I'm sitting with you and I'm calm, it sounds irrational to me explaining to you what it would feel like for me to have it. But the only way that I feel I can explain it in the best way is to say that all of us have some kind of uncomfortable relationship with death. All of us wonder what it's like. All of us fear kind of those last moments, your life flashing in front of your eyes. Maybe you or some of your audience members have had that feeling before. That's what it feels like to have a panic attack. You are absolutely 100% convinced you are dying. And being confronted with death in that way, with absolutely no doubt in your mind that this is for sure the end. You can't breathe. And then combined with that, the absolute certainty that you are going crazy. You're losing your mind. It's so terrifying to feel that way. That's the best way I can describe it. Physically, though, what happened to me was I was just sitting down doing my work. I started losing vision in my right eye. Then I started getting blurry left eye, and I thought, maybe I'm hungry. I didn't look after myself today. I'll order something to eat. Then my right hand and arm started shaking, but like this. I had to physically restrain it from shaking. I lost feeling in my right leg down to my foot. Then I had started to get really bad heart palpitations. Like I have never experienced chest pain like that in my life. And then the worst thing was that it felt like my throat was closing up and my tongue was swelling and I wasn't able to swallow. And then everything just went absolutely haywire from there on. And, then I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't even know something like an anxiety disorder existed. So when I eventually got to the hospital, they didn't even help me for a while. The doctor was screaming in my face, "What did you take? What are you on?" I'm like, I'm here for work. I'm on nothing. I just know I'm dying. So eventually they did help me. This ensued into so many tests from so many different specialists. which was great because they ruled out all the physical causes and then said I had an anxiety disorder. And I was unbelievably mad at that because I really didn't know something like this existed. I was convinced the doctors didn't know what to say. So they were telling me it's just stress, which I now know anxiety and just stress is two different things. But, I was just so alone in that moment. I remember the last doctor I was at, I was in hospital. I thought, if I leave this hospital, I am for sure going to die because I don't know what to do with myself. What do I do if I stop breathing? What do I do if I start shaking like this again? I don't know what to do. I need to stay here so they can give me oxygen or whatever it is they need to save my life. And he came in, he threw a box of tablets at me, and he told me, you are stressed. Stress never helped anybody. Take this and feel better.
And how did that make you feel?
Oh my gosh. I think I cried that entire night because I just felt so invalidated. I felt like I was making it up. I felt like I was imagining it. But at the same time, I could feel the physical symptoms and the fear of not being able to go home. And one of the things about a panic disorder is one of the key things is you start to change your behavior so that you won't have a panic attack again because you're so afraid of it. So I stopped eating completely for 2 weeks. My husband was at a stage where he literally started crying, begging me to eat because he just told me, you can't go on like this. Like, you have to eat something. But I had such fear of the choking sensation. I just thought, if I'm eating and I swallow something and I choke, I'm for sure going to die. And again, now telling this to you, I can see how that may seem unreasonable, but when this happens to you, there is no rationality. Your logical mind just completely stops functioning. Everything outside of you stops existing, except this absolute need for survival.
And I wondered as to, because I often think that diagnosis is or can be of itself a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
To your point, I wanted to ask what it felt like when you were told panic disorder, but that's, there's a sense of frustration and I guess some misunderstanding, even not knowing or necessarily associating yourself what that was or even having a sense of what that might mean.
Yes. So you have to understand, I come from a family with a very long history of undiagnosed mental illnesses, which I only later in life understood to equate to many of the very bizarre behaviors in my house. I have close family relatives with bipolar, schizophrenia. I got this diagnosis and I immediately thought, I don't want this diagnosis and I don't want to know because I don't want to be like them. That's going to mean that everything I fought for to get out of that, nothing is going to help me because I'm genetically inclined to follow the same path they followed. There's nothing I can do. So I was horrified and very scared of this diagnosis. But what I did learn is that it actually gave me so much power because now I understood, or I was on a path where I could understand, okay, well, let's unpack this. What does this look like? What does my toolkit look like? How can I help myself? And what causes it? And for the longest time, I was afraid it's genetic. And yes, it can be genetic. But I learned later on that panic disorder is actually related to complex post-traumatic stress. So that is, when PTSD is like a soldier at war, right? They see something horrible, they come home, a sound, a noise, something reminds you of that event. CPTSD is when you've been for a very long period exposed to trauma by somebody in a position of trust to you, or that was supposed to be taking care of you. And although it was sad to understand that from my history, it gave me power and understanding, like, maybe this is not in my blood. Maybe this is circumstantial. And I can work with that. I can take responsibility for my parts and I can work with what I need to in my past. So yes, it's a double-edged sword, but it depends on how you look at it. Do you not want to know and not know how to help yourself? Or do you want to know and maybe find out things that you didn't know could help you?
What was the hardest thing to admit to yourself in that time?
I think the hardest thing for me to admit was and this sounds so counterintuitive, but that I'm not broken, that maybe there's a reason I'm wired the way I'm wired. And that in itself was traumatic because my entire life I've been told I'm broken. That was the messages. And I've become comfortable with that. That's who I am. That's my identity. And now for somebody to say, well, hang on a minute, maybe you're not broken. You know, there are just a couple of pieces out of place that we can put together. It's a weird way for your mind to put itself back into a good space.
But ultimately empowering, albeit taking some
Yes.
time to get to that place,
Yes.
right? There's a lot of fix to get you there, but ultimately it becomes
Yes.
empowering and powerful
Yes.
in terms of where it might take you.
For sure.
Interesting. You've written and spoken about the physical symptoms of anxiety, especially how it shows up in the skin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak on how that became your clue and ultimately your calling?
Yeah. So it's a strange conversation because usually when I'm asked about this, there's almost this kind of understanding that I'm one of those brave ones that decided to change my career like midlife. How did I do it? How did I decide to do it? And that's not at all how it happened for me. This was not my choice. I loved my human rights career. I had so much purpose in it. My identity was attached to it. When we moved to Portugal, COVID happened. It wasn't possible for me to travel. And my deepest, ultimate breaking also happened in that period. I was very sick. I could not function at all on a daily basis. It was really at a point where I needed to admit to myself that very large things in my life had to change for me to be able to function. Then I started noticing, like I said earlier, this is more than just a panic attack, right? Because your body is always so anxious, it starts getting confused because you're constantly sending the wrong messages. Like there is no tiger to be afraid of, but your body's telling you there is. So it affects your gut. You have irritable bowel syndrome. It affects many other things, like I get migraine attacks. And then also I started noticing my sensitive skin was now in overdrive. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm literally at my lowest low at this moment. The worst thing for me is that there's so much about this diagnosis I can't control. Maybe there's one thing I can choose that I can have some form of control over. Maybe that could be the sensitive skin. I know this beautiful ingredient from South Africa. I can go back to school, do my certificate in cosmetic chemistry, because that's going to take my mind off things. The worst thing you can do for an anxious mind is sit there thinking all day. That should be avoided. So, you know, that took me 2 years of studying and challenging myself. And that's really how it was born, out of this pure need of having to survive and figuring out what does the next phase of my life look like. And then it just kind of grew into what it is now.
Tell me about that first moment when Figgi became real. And I don't mean the launch. I mean, when there was that shift inside you, you thought there's a product here, a calling, more than a product. It is a calling.
Yeah.
When did that moment happen?
I think it was actually for me when I started paying more attention to how I wanted to show up spiritually in the world and how I wanted to explore that part of my life, because it's so tied into that. And I realized that I just have this natural talent of understanding what is healing and what isn't, and how things smell and what they can do for the body, and what you can use to heal small things on your skin. And maybe I can use this. Maybe this can be something that's not just for me, but for many others out there like me. And this could open a pathway to what is now Figgi Soul, where I can speak to others that are like me, not trying to fix them or giving them golden tickets to happiness. If I could fix you, I would have fixed myself, you know? So just being there and saying, well, this does exist. I can tell you where I've stumbled. Let's build a community. Let's be there for each other. That was really when the shift happened, when I realized that I can dig deeper into something that I think I may be able to be good at and share that, hopefully, with others that will enjoy it.
What was your vision when you created Figgi? What were you building for?
I think my biggest vision was to be able to be in a position where I could take ownership of who I was completely. Because in my previous life, when I was diagnosed, nobody knew. I didn't want anybody to know. I was unbelievably ashamed of it, but I was also in the legal career. It wasn't really the space where you go, oh, I have anxiety. You know, you're either on or off the bus, you're good or you're not. So that was for me the main thing. This is something that's completely different than the very rigid, rational, realistic, reasonable way of thinking that is law, to something a little bit more fluid, you know, where I can explore a little bit more of who I am, how I fit into this world, and how others fit into this world, and how we can use this and the conversations that we have to create something beautiful and healing.
I guess there's so much noise in the great thing is there is so much noise in the wellness and beauty space. I guess that's a blessing and a curse. How do you keep Figgi anchored in truth and not trend?
I don't care about trend. That's not why I founded Figgi. And I think that's what confuses so many people in the beauty community. I really don't care. If my products are not for you, that's wonderful. I respect that. There are so many other products that you can try. We're very open about what Figgi is and what Figgi isn't. It's just for dry and sensitive skin. We don't fearmonger. We don't badmouth ingredients. We're completely driven by what has been scientifically proven to upset sensitive skin. I wanted to bring a luxury experience back to sensitive skin, you know, and our community is all about love and sharing that and being there for each other. And I have so much respect for those that do not feel that is their home. And I mean, I would even recommend products to you that you would rather perhaps prefer. And I think that's been the difference.
And I'm fascinated, what comes first, product or community?
Always community for me. And I think that comes from my human rights career. So you cannot have a product without a community. A community is where the love and the trust and the loyalty and the service to one another comes from. A product can be empowering and enriching, but it's just a product. What gives it soul and heart and makes it work is the people behind it, not just those creating it, but those that believe in it and use it and understand it. So for me, it will always be community first.
How do you personally manage your mental health now? You're a founder, you're a mother, you're a woman still living with anxiety. I guess it's one of those things you'll always live with, right? So
yes.
How do you manage your mental health and well-being now?
To be honest, it's been hard. It's hard being an entrepreneur. It's very stressful being a founder.
Hence why I asked, right? You picked arguably one of the most stressful pursuits you could undertake.
So although I'm not a first-time founder, you have to remember I did come from a service industry into a product-based industry, which is completely different.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to keep that balance between understanding what my limitations are and when I need to stop. But that has been my journey in understanding my panic disorder. One of the key things is understanding what your triggers are.
Right.
For example, sleep is extremely important. If I start not sleeping well, that's a sign, and I need to pay attention to it immediately. I have to exercise every day to get rid of that nervous energy. So it's hard keeping that balance, and sometimes you miss it, you know. But what I have found that works for me is understanding that I'm stronger in listening to my limitations than I am in not. So, for example, if I'm having all of these signs and I know a panic attack is coming, it's better for me to say, okay, today I'm just going to stay in the office until 3 and I'll pick this up again tomorrow. Whereas in the past, I didn't. And when I have a panic attack, I'm down for 1 to 2 weeks. So instead of taking 4 hours off to look after myself, I have now forced myself in a position where I'm literally zero on a contract for 2 weeks, and I could have taken 4 hours. So I try my best to do that. But sometimes it's more difficult. So this year, for example, has been excessively difficult. I lost my 36-year-old sister 4 weeks ago. And it's hard because I've been opening the store, I've been looking at the launch, and I'm almost scared to go home when everything is settled down because it's going to catch up with me sometime. I haven't cried, I haven't dealt with it, and I know it's coming. And the circumstances around how she passed, she passed from alcoholism. It was really a very, very horrifying death. And it's directly related to our traumas. Mine showed up as panic disorder. Hers showed up as alcoholism. That's how she dealt with it. And keeping that balance and understanding that I am a little bit more susceptible to these things than other people may be is very, very hard. And I'm still learning how to do that every day. I'm open to sharing the new insights I've gained, but I for sure do not have all the answers, unfortunately.
No, I'm really sorry to hear of that. And I think to your point as well, it's not one of those things you overcome. It's something that you learn to manage and live with, I suspect. I mean, I'm not qualified medically to make that determination, but that's what I would imagine would be the situation that you face, is that you learn to adapt certain solutions that work for you that may not work for other people, but they will work for you, and you'll manage your life accordingly. I certainly think, to your point, sleep is a superpower, is a phrase that I will often use, and I think ought not to get underestimated. I think it's really interesting as well that much of the rhetoric we're led to believe as to the founder journey is this kind of hustle culture, always on. Sleep is something you can do in the future, but actually what you're going to be doing is sleeping under a desk, in your office for the next 4 years until such point as things achieve as you want to see them achieve. And I think it's really important that people like you come on and share a message that there is another way. And actually, importantly, there has to be another way.
There absolutely has to be. And one of the key things about this is, and understanding how I am wired, is also learning to see the gifts that come with that. So yes, I am very anxious, but now I can say, well, maybe it's telling me something. I have very strong intuition. I'm very sensitive to the emotions in a room, and if people are off, or I'm very good at being diplomatic and sorting things out. But it's also helped me to be great at delegating, which is so crucial being an entrepreneur. Just because I understand that there really just are skills and personality traits that I will never have. And that's okay, because I can surround myself with people who do have that. Sometimes they're going to call on me because they can't be diplomatic and sort out very sensitive issues, but I cannot be challenging and dynamic and brutal and hard. Sometimes that's needed, but that's not me. And these small things I've come to learn from my diagnosis, because I've had to find a way to work around how I'm wired, but still being able to show up in the world and say, well, hang on, I'm not defective, I'm just different. And I can take responsibility. For my diagnosis, I'm not going to make it your problem, but I am going to find ways around how I show up for you and for others by leaning on those that are stronger than me in certain ways. And they will then lean on me when it's needed.
What do you think people still get wrong about, particularly, I think, high achieving women with anxiety?
Oh, particularly high achieving women. I think maybe what people get wrong the most is that they don't take time to look behind the curtain, right? We all show up in life a certain way because of something that's happening. We're not just all made that way and put here. Like, something is obviously going on beneath the surface. I think high achieving women with anxiety show up that way because they haven't had, in my opinion, and this is true, I think, for many young men also in the industry, the right mentorship. Okay, so that's their method of protecting themselves, showing up in a way that may be a little too harsh or too brutal and causing anxiety for themselves because they feel they need to be a certain way or act a certain way. And that's simply just not true. I'm never, ever going to be a strong leader. I'm never going to be somebody that's going to walk in a room and just say exactly the way I want it. And that's okay, because my leadership style works fine. It works great for me.
I want to just, sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like I have to.
Yeah.
Just to pull you up on that use of the word strong leader, because to my mind, I think that vulnerability is strength.
You see.
So it's interesting that, I would argue respectfully that I disagree, because I do think showing up with vulnerability and having the courage to show up with that vulnerability is an enormous strength.
Yeah.
And yet I understand why necessarily we associate this sort of strong leadership with conviction and clarity and absolute certainty of walking in a room and saying, I want it this way. Well, am I really getting
Exactly.
that same courage coming through? I think there's real strength in that. That's as I would see that as strong leadership.
Well, that's how I would see it too. I mean, there's definitely different industries that require different things, but there you have to know yourself and to know where you would be. And this is where a lot of women sometimes get angry at me. And believe me, I am such a supporter of female power. But in my experience, most women that show up high achieving and anxious is usually because they don't know themselves. And they haven't taken the time or haven't been afforded the time or the luxury to get to know themselves. So that's an insecurity that comes up, and that little voice that tells you you're not enough. This is imposter syndrome. You don't have all the certificates. You don't have all the knowledge. And obviously it shows up in a way, right? So there's so much that goes into that. It's a difficult one to solve, but it's wonderful to know that there are people out there that understand that, and that it's okay to just show up the way that you are, because you're always going to go back to your natural behavioral tendency. No matter what you try to be, it's always when you're most stressed, you're always going to go back to what comes naturally to you. So why not just show up naturally from the start?
I think it, for many, not just male and female, that actually showing up and not being true to yourself can eventually cause a huge amount of stress.
Yeah.
Anyway, right? Because you're not able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and think, this isn't me. I'm creating an image, or I'm wearing a mask that I believe the world wants to see of me, but there isn't a true reflection of who I am. Eventually that's going to bite too.
Yeah, that's going to be very hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's come back to this, the role that community plays in what you're building. I think through Figgi, through The Anxious Calm, through your podcast, through all sorts of mechanisms, you create this community. What part is that playing for you? Not only you, I think importantly, but also for your customers, for your community that you're building?
I think the most important part for me was the most difficult part in the beginning was sharing my story and talking about it. And one, because I'm very private, and two, because that's part and parcel of the story. Don't tell. Nobody should know. It's really bad for people to know. So in the beginning, my panic was actually worse, because every time I used to talk about it on a podcast, I would have this thing afterwards. Oh, I told, and it just stays with you. And what has helped me in this community is understanding that, one, I'm not alone. There are others like me. And two, sharing my story has been cathartic in some way. I think it's been the most healing of all the experiences that I've been through, is by being engaged in this community and showing up and sharing my story and knowing that it can be healing too.
You're clearly, and I think you described yourself as a highly sensitive person.
Yeah.
When did that shift from something you had to manage to something that you could lead with?
Oh, wow. Only maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I read Dr. Elaine Aron's book when I was probably 30. That opened a big door for me in understanding, whoa, okay, so maybe I can understand a few things here. But it was really only about 2.5 years ago, after my huge breaking, after I'd already started Figgi, where something clicked for me. You know, it was a series of things that happened. Okay, let me understand my triggers. Let me start Figgi. Let me delve deeper into this whole thing that I want to be more spiritually connected. Let me delve deeper into this. And it was like steps that I took to get there. And then I think you just get there someday and something just clicks for you. And it feels like all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. I can't point to a specific time or space or place. It just gradually happened because of all the other work I was doing on myself, I mean.
How do you think that sensitivity has made you a better founder, and where has it made you harder?
Better founder for sure, because I work with products for sensitive skin. So I'm very in tune with what should be gentle and what should be free from, and how is this experience for somebody with sensitive skin, with the community, understanding how I should portray the message, how I should, word it, the kinds of people that are drawn to me. It's definitely made that a lot easier for me. Harder is the beauty industry is a brutal business. Brutal. Negotiating manufacturing prices and getting through shippings and customs and taxes. Okay, I was blessed with international law as a background, so I had a lot of the regulatory experience. But the tougher conversations were, and continue to be, horrifying for me. I absolutely hate it. Like, I have sleepless nights thinking that I need to show up and do this sometimes. But that's where I call upon people that can help me with that. Because at the end of the day, they can have the tough conversations, but I can make sure that we have a wonderful relationship with my manufacturer so that they're always, in a good space and place with us. They're always trying their best. Rooibos is intensely difficult to formulate with. They have patience with me. They test and retest. And that's because of the way I treat them and the relationship I build with them. And then another element of how those negotiations go.
So how do you're scaling a brand, you're sharing vulnerably. How do you protect yourself while still being honest?
I think the protection comes in being honest. You're not protected if you're dishonest, right? Because there's so much more to worry about and so much more to hide. I literally have nothing left to hide. There literally is nothing that isn't somewhere on the internet to be found. So I think almost the protection comes in the beauty of honesty.
As I see it anyway, I think you're building, you're building more than a business. You're building belief. So what's your North Star?
You mean for Figgi or for myself?
Maybe for both.
For both?
Yeah.
Oh, I think my North Star, I always have three things that I come back to for me and my family. Are we healthy? Are we happy? Are we good people? If those three align, then everything's going to be okay. Are we healthy? Are we happy? Are we at least just trying our best to be good people? All the rest is the outside of it. That's the core. So I try to keep that my North Star.
And arguably, I would assume it dovetails very nicely with Figgi.
It does. It does, actually. And, saying those three things sounds so easy, healthy, happy. But there's a lot that goes into that. What are we talking about in terms of healthy? Bodily health, emotional, psychological, spiritual. There's a lot that goes into asking yourself that question, am I healthy? There's a lot that goes into asking your question, am I happy? What does that mean? Does it mean peace? Does it mean success? Does it mean money? It's very large life questions. And I feel like Figgi creates the space where those questions can be asked and explored, and where it's okay to make mistakes in getting to the answers that you need.
So for someone who's listening today who perhaps is feeling like they're breaking, what would you want them to hear in your story today?
I would want them to hear that if you feel you're breaking, break. That's the best thing you can do. Because not breaking is just setting yourself up for failure. Feel whatever you need to feel. Cry if you want to cry. Be angry if you want to be angry. And move on. Don't bottle it up. Don't think you can deal with it later. Which I'm saying now, after I just told you that I think I'm going to deal with a few things later on. But
you're acknowledging that you
Exactly.
acknowledge that, I think, not least. You're not sat there denying it. You're saying this is going to happen.
For sure.
You're leaning into it, which is, I think, you're not trying to avoid it. You know it's coming. I think for many, avoiding something feels like the right course of action. It feels like the stronger thing to do, to push it away.
We invest so much energy in that. Yeah. So much time is spent in trying to avoid the collision that you think is coming. Sometimes you just need to walk right through it. And it's okay to feel like now may not be the time, but you have to afford yourself some time for it. Like I just told you, this is the end of our trip. I'm going home with my daughter. She'll be going back to school. I'll have a week off. And I know this is going to be a brutally emotional week for me. But I've planned for it. I know it's going to be tough. I have a wonderful support system. You have to do that for yourself. You know, it's not always about being strong, and it's not always about showing up. Sometimes it's about showing up for you.
I think that's a really important message. Acceptance is key, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if at times we're led to believe, or at least influenced to consider that not to accept and actually to push back and actually to fight against.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think the strength comes from not fighting and leaning into it, accepting it and working through it. And I don't think that's a message that gets shared enough.
I think that's really crucial because, you know, sometimes life has a way of sorting itself out. Sometimes things need to just breathe for a minute. Sometimes there's space between the words, and we're in this society where we feel, okay, it has to happen now. It has to happen tomorrow. And if it doesn't happen, we have to make it happen because that's what success is. And that's what it means to be successful. And the truth of that is, you can do that, but that's just going to cause burnout, because if it's not meant to happen for you right now, it's not going to happen.
What's one belief you had to unlearn to become who you are now?
That I am not broken and I don't need to be fixed. I'm just wired differently. And I needed to understand that, you know, when you're ordering furniture from IKEA, and it's a horrible process to build it. And when you've been struggling for 4 hours, you read the instructions. That's kind of how I felt about myself. You know, when all else fails, read the manual. And that was the hardest thing I needed to unlearn. I'm not broken and I don't need to be fixed. I just need to understand why I am put together like this and how that works.
But I think all those glorious imperfections, if I can describe them that way, are what makes us beautifully human.
Yeah.
All of us, right? So I think it's a really interesting insight into this sense of, particularly, I mean, I don't want to go down the route of totally doing down social media, but we're able to perpetuate this world of my perfect life, right?
Yeah.
Which is incredibly damaging, I feel, for an awful lot of people, particularly for younger people who are seeing those images and being led to believe, well, it's everyone else is all right and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, therefore, the courage to stand up and say, hey, look, we're all dealing with something somehow. I think we have a tendency to ascribe degrees of awfulness to certain circumstances. You've described some today, of which I cannot compute. I don't have that in my life to be able to relate to and understand how awful it might be. It sounds horrific. But we do have a tendency to ascribe degrees of awfulness to certain scenarios.
Yeah.
And they're all relative to the individual.
Yeah.
You know, so that beauty of our own imperfections, I think, is what makes us wonderfully human. And I think people to have the courage, the more people that can have the courage to step forward and say, hey, look, we've all got something we're contending with, but there is another world on the other side of it. And just because you're having that to contend with, you're not broken. It's a really, really powerful message. Really powerful message. So thank you for sharing it with us. What's one belief you'll never compromise on, no matter how far Figgi scales?
We're stronger together. My husband came into my life. My husband is the reason that I was able to exit my circumstances. He's been such a key player in my life. He was the one that put me on the founder's journey in the first place, that encouraged me to become an entrepreneur. And no matter what happens and how hard it gets, we know we're stronger together. As long as we're together, as long as we're sitting at the same table every night, whatever else happens, we can deal with. So that is absolutely one belief I will never, ever change if it is within my power.
That's a beautiful place on which to end. But before we do, I want to ensure that listeners, where can listeners go to find out more about Figgi, to find out more about your community, to find out more about you? We'll put this in the show notes, but where should we point them?
The best place is figgibeautyuk.com. There you can find the community, all our products, a listing of all our awards and where the shop location is, what events we will be at for the rest of the year, where I will be speaking. Everything can be found there, or Instagram at figgi.beauty.
Fantastic. Jeanne Retief, thank you. That's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for showing up. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
And I wish you continued success in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. If this conversation hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a review wherever you're listening. It helps Extrology reach the leaders, founders, and career athletes who need stories like this the most. Subscribe on YouTube, follow the show, and if you want to go deeper on today's themes, clarity, resilience, purpose, head over to our Substack. That's where we break it all down and give you the tools to apply it in your own life. And if you're not just listening but building something of your own, check out The Growth Founder. It's our strategic performance system for founders scaling with pressure, not playbooks. For career athletes navigating change or chasing clarity, there's the Career Edge, our OS for high performers who treat their development like training, not drift. Whatever you're building, whoever you're becoming, this is your edge. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and lead with something that matters. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.